PBI software and the mob. My mother told me ever since I was little, money is power. Power is freedom. It was simple. It stuck with me. I was envious of people with money. They had nice and new clothes. They had pretty, new, fast cars, nice, big houses, and fancy vacations and trips. We were poor. We had a computer though, and that was very uncommon because my parents took out a loan in hopes to become computer programmers someday and elevate themselves to a better place of income and professional respect. My mother assured me that I could own a huge mansion and a fancy car if I worked hard and focused and remained righteous. She would say good things would come to me if I did those things. She promised me that. I decided early that it was more important to earn more money than to scrape by with less. My entire childhood was spent earning money anywhere, any way that I could. Bags and bags of walnuts. I collected walnuts from the walnut orchard behind my parents' house in San Martin and sell them to neighbors, anyone who would buy them for 50 cents, a grocery paper bag filled to the brim of walnuts. Filling flats of strawberries for a nearby Japanese couple that owned a small farm was another thing that I did to earn money. I worked alongside the illegal, undocumented aliens, picking fruit. Rarely someone would drive by and scream, "Immigration," out of spite or just outright being mean. Many of the workers would flee upon hearing that exclamation. It was cruel. But I just kept picking my strawberries to make money. In addition to my numerous failed adventure module story and computer game publishing attempts, I did a lot of other things to earn money. I worked chores and odds and ends at home. I had worked in fast food at Burger King after being rejected by Taco Bell in an interview. I worked for Clure and Associates and Unicorn Electronics assembling electronic boards. I had a summer programming job at Tandem Computers. At 17, I got my first contract with a company called PBI Software while I was still in high school. And I published that very game, The Tower of Miraglan, before I was 18 years old. I was well along the way to finishing my very first game, The Tower of Miraglan, but I had no idea where I could get published. And I had such bad experiences failing with rejection after rejection in my other attempts. I saw the address of Electronic Arts, EA, in a computer game magazine advertisement, and it was within an hour-and-a-half drive for me. Once again, friend of mine in the area in time, Jeff Lefferts, we journeyed far away in hopes of the opportunity. We could not find EA, however. The address was not on the map that we had. There was no GPS or navigation for that era. It was all paper maps or you got lost. We headed to a gas station to get a newer map, and we saw a company sign called PBI Software, as we did just down the street from that gas station. I had seen PBI Software's name in computer game magazines too, so without finding Electronic Arts, we went to PBI Software, as fate ordained it. Inside, the receptionist was confused, wondering why these two high school kids were here asking to talk to someone about publishing a game. We had no appointment, nothing. What hubris it was that we would just show up and expect that we would be heard by someone with enough authority to look at a product and decide if they would possibly publish it. We were being told to leave, that was not going to happen. However, an Asian man walked in right then to the lobby as we were being told to leave, and he asked what's going on. And then he said, "Why don't we check out their game, their software?" He looked directly at me and said, "You got a disc, right? Let's do this." Well, my game's early version was a demo of my idea and the first level of gameplay for the Tower of Miraglen. It loaded up, and the Asian man said right off, "Let's publish this. Come to my office." He literally printed and gave us a contract right there within hours. We were to go home, though, and make another demo under his direction that would support a hardware sister company that he owned called MD Ideas. He had a memory and stereo sound card that company sold. He told us if we could make the game support those hardware devices, he would publish the game and give us a signing bonus as well. It was a dream come true. He offered the contract but did not sign it yet and said, basically, good luck. Well, we did the work, that was no question. We signed the contract immediately before we began that work. I think I barely skimmed it. I was just so excited to be able to make a game and get published. I knew I could do the work that he expected to change, to adapt to his hardware. The plot and design of Tower of Miraglen, or just Tower, was based on my second Dungeons & Dragons D&D adventure module, which was rejected for publication by TSR Hobbies. I had even printed 200 copies of that module and self-published them by going to a fantasy gaming convention in the California Dunfay Hotel in San Mateo. Well, anyway, back to my story. I gave a copy of the Tower of Miraglen to any relative that remotely expressed interest in it. My cousin Sharon, who was in an Oregonian cult, as in a cult based in Oregon, shared the copy that I mailed to her with her cult leader. The cult leader was inspired by the Tower of Miraglen and declared it was God communicating through me to get to him so that he might interpret it and spread its meaning. Crazy. Well, my life can seem crazy at times. The Tower of Miraglen, well, it expressed philosophies of good struggling over evil, and that evil was the core tenet of the leader that he wanted to focus on. It was obvious and easy. The cultists focused on the rooms and the levels and the progression of insanity of its central character, the wizard named Mendelik. I could see how a religious leader could use the many story elements of my game, the Tower of Miraglen, to spin his own messages with compelling outside validation to his followers. It seemed to me it was just another religious tool to manipulate people. Stories are remembered long after the facts are forgotten was a hallmark to my game, the Tower of Miraglen. The idea was simple. Do not focus on the specifics or the details of history, but focus instead on the spirit of the story and what should be learned from it. The eventual site where the tower would be built was upon a hill above a glistening reflective pool that radiated a fog aura of light wafting above its waters. The pool reflected back not what cast its image into it, but rather the truth of the thing or person that looked within it. People's faces would appear deformed and twisted the more wickedness that they bore within their hearts, or the damage they had inflicted to others in their past. There was no escaping the truth in the waters of the Tower of Miraglen. People's faces would emit glowing auras of yellow to white-hued light, the more goodness and truthfulness that they bore in their lives. Rusted and decrepit objects showed images of their glory, new days and shimmer what they could be should they be restored. The Mirror Glen was a secret that was kept by the local village. But the arch-wizard Mendelik of the Tower of Mirror Glen was modeled after my grandfather. I digitized images of my grandfather dressed in a robe, a cowl, and a wizard's hat, holding a big staff and sporting a huge medallion. Many of the wizard's philosophies were those of my own, which often were extensions of my grandfather's. Mirror Glen's narrative ultimately sought to show how good intentions are subverted often to inflict horror on the innocent, and that good can become corrupted and lost through trickery to do bad. The arch-wizard Mendelik had created a weapon so powerful that it could extinguish souls and armies at mere sight. It was like a nuclear weapon. He imbued the horrific power in the necklace that he would call the Medallion of Soul Stealing. The medallion would rip the life forces out of its victims and lock them away in suspension eternally within an imprisoned facet forever and ever. There would be no heaven, no hell, no limbo. It would be nothingness forever. That is what the wizard did to those that opposed him and his views. The wizard believed he was good, but realized he was potentially the most evil of anyone that he could have conceived. He contemplated that all he had done in the name of good was perhaps evil, and it backfired. Of all the arch-wizard's magical powers, he could not prevent his aging and his eventual death. He had to find a place to store his lethal nuclear weapon, the Medallion of Soul Stealing. The wizard Mendelik had learned of the Mirror Glen through scrying across the world to find where he might store the medallion for the rest of eternity, after he had died himself of mortal's old age. As he visited the Mirror Glen for the first time, he saw his wicked, nightmarish, disfigured face and form as he stared into the Mirror's Glen, reflecting reality. He saw what he had become. His fears that his actions were wicked had been confirmed. The wizard had to build a mighty structure to entomb the Medallion of Soul Stealing. The tower would be full of psychological conflicts, as each level of the tower would represent the spiritual and emotional degeneration of the wizard until he was all but wicked and total evil. In that apex moment, the player must spare or kill the specter of the wizard and deliver the medallion to the world once more, or leave it entombed. If the player takes the medallion, it is stolen from the player and used to wreak havoc upon the world. If the player leaves it behind, the world devolves into chaos and warfare, as it has always been fated to do without intervention. The funny thing, although I sold only a few hundred total copies of my original paper-based D&D module, The Tower of Mirror Glen, over 30 years later, a man in Australia contacted me asking if I had a copy of it and could validate its authenticity. It was a real original copy of my adventure module that had been saved for over 3 decades. It was so cool to me. I finished the game, The Tower of Mirror Glen, graduated from high school, and continued to make games for the publisher PBI Software for several years. It was the real beginning of my video game career. PBI Software had a sister hardware company, like I said, MD Ideas. Both were under an umbrella company called ITAT, which was based in China. Or at least so we were told. Jeff Lefferts, a friend of mine that I've described earlier, that also joined me, he drew the art for my games. He joined me after graduation from high school as well, and we both moved to Foster City and worked for PBI Software full-time, foregoing college for the near term. That idea worked out for about a year, but we did get bored and we decided to go to San Jose State University while we continued to make games. I paid my way and lived in the penthouse of a big building called the Colonnade, across the street from the university's main campus. We had a great relationship with PBI Software.